My family called me the paper scavenger. It wasn't a term of endearment. It was a verbal spear they threw with surgical precision, designed to pin me to a life of irrelevance. To them, my world was a dusty mausoleum of forgotten letters, brittle photographs, and the faint sweet smell of decaying paper. I was Julian, the 32-year-old archivist, the man who chose the dead over the living, and whose hands were stained not with grease, but with the ghostly residue of history. They couldn't understand it. In their world of fleeting digital trends and hollow crypto fortunes, the past was a liability, something to be deleted, not preserved. What they didn't know was that in the hushed, climate-controlled vaults of the sovereign trust, I wasn't a scavenger. I was a legacy hunter. My job was to breathe life into the final secret wishes of the world's most powerful historical figures. I didn't just handle paper. I handled the keys to dormant empires, the final testaments of deposed kings, and the untraceable fortunes of industrial magnates who had vanished from history. In the eyes of a select few, bankers in Geneva, lawyers in London, and the descendants of forgotten dynasties, I was the man who could make the dead speak. But today, none of that mattered. Today, the enemy wasn't time. It was my own family. I stood in the doorway of our ancestral home, a sprawling Victorian house that was groaning under the weight of my father's debts. A foreclosure notice was tacked to the door, a stark white flag of surrender. Inside, chaos reigned. My father, Richard, a man whose ambition had always outpaced his talent, and my younger brother, Alex, a self-proclaimed digital marketing guru with the attention span of a gnat, were tearing the place apart. They weren't packing, they were hunting. "It has to be here, Dad!" Alex grunted, heaving a stack of my grandmother's antique books onto the floor. Great-grandfather Silas wasn't a fool. He wouldn't have just left us with nothing. My father, his face flushed with a mixture of sweat and desperation, ripped a loose floorboard from the landing. "Your brother and his damn boxes are probably slowing us down. He's been hoarding this junk for years." I flinched as he gestured towards my carefully organized archive boxes, the ones I'd spent weekends protecting from damp and decay. One of them had tipped over in their frenzy, spilling a cascade of sepia-toned letters tied with faded silk ribbon. "Be careful," I snapped, rushing forward to gather them. "These are from 1918. The ink is fragile." Alex let out a derisive snort. "Still playing with your dead paper, Julian? We're about to lose our house, and you're worried about a 100-year-old grocery list." He kicked at a loose letter with his trendy, oversized sneaker. "It's not a grocery list, you idiot," I said, my voice dangerously low. "It's a soldier's last letter home from the Marne." I carefully placed it back in the box, my hands shielding it as if it were a living thing. The familiar ache of being misunderstood settled deep in my bones. It was the same ache I felt when my father had mortgaged the house to fund Alex's latest failed NFT project. The same ache from years of their condescending jokes about my hobby. For years, I had secretly funneled money from my discreet consulting fees to keep their heads above water, covering debts they thought were magically resolved by creative accounting. I did it to protect this house, to protect the history it held. But now, their greed had become a wrecking ball. I retreated to the library, the one room they hadn't yet desecrated, and sank into a leather armchair. The weight of it all was suffocating. I could save this house with a single phone call. I could wire the full amount and have the foreclosure canceled within the hour. But I knew it wouldn't solve the problem. It would only reinforce their belief that I was their safety net, the boring, reliable fool who would always be there to clean up their messes. I must have been sitting there for an hour when I heard their hushed, excited voices from the hallway. I crept to the door, pressing my ear against the cool wood. "I'm telling you, Dad, this is it," Alex whispered, his voice crackling with excitement. "The old family lawyer, before he died, he told you, right? Silas's inheritance. He said the key wasn't gold or jewels. He said it was hidden in plain sight, something only a true heir would recognize." My father's voice was a low rumble. "He said it would unlock a fortune that could make us kings. Forget the house. This is about changing our entire lives. We just need to find the catalyst object he mentioned in his journals." My blood ran cold. The catalyst object. The Silas inheritance. They were chasing a family legend, a ghost story told to children. But it wasn't a legend. It was real, and it was far more valuable and dangerous than they could ever imagine. They thought they were hunting for a treasure map. They had no idea they were fumbling in the dark for the trigger of a financial weapon of mass destruction. And I was the only person on Earth who knew how to disarm it, or to aim it. I stood frozen behind the library door, the muffled thumps and scrapes from the hallway sounding like a countdown to disaster. My father and Alex were children playing with dynamite, their ignorance a terrifying kind of confidence. They were hunting for a catalyst object, a single item that would supposedly unlock great-grandfather Silas's mythical fortune. I knew what they were looking for, not because of legends, but because Silas's entire file, his real last will and testament, was secured in a climate-controlled vault under my direct supervision at the Sovereign Trust. Silas Thorne wasn't just a wealthy industrialist. He was a master of economic warfare. The Silas inheritance wasn't a pot of gold. It was a failsafe, a dead man's switch designed to protect his legacy from the greed he correctly predicted in his descendants. The inheritance was a complex web of shell corporations, offshore accounts, and controlling shares in major global companies, all dormant, all tied to a single ingenious trigger. Activating it without the precise protocol, a sequence of codes, locations, and verbal passphrases known only to me, wouldn't unlock the fortune. It would liquidate it. Every asset would be instantly and anonymously donated to a dozen different international charities, dissolving a multi-generational empire into thin air in less than 60 seconds. The catalyst object was the key, but it was also the self-destruct button. I stepped out of the library, composing my face into a mask of weary resignation. "Still at it? You've been tearing the house apart for hours. There's nothing here." Alex scoffed, wiping a smudge of dust from his forehead. "You wouldn't know, Julian. You're too busy sniffing old paper to see the big picture. We're on the verge of something huge." "The only thing you're on the verge of is an eviction notice," I countered, my voice flat. My father turned on me, his eyes wild with a feverish glint. "Don't you get it? This is our last chance. Your great-grandfather was a genius. He built everything from nothing. He wouldn't just let it all crumble away." He held up one of Silas's old leather-bound journals, its spine cracked and pages yellowed. "The answer is in here somewhere. The fortune awaits the one who can see the value in what others discard." He wrote that himself. I had to suppress a bitter laugh. The irony was suffocating. They were quoting his words while embodying the very weakness he designed the inheritance to thwart. They saw value only in what could be quickly sold. "You're chasing a fairy tale," I said, trying to steer them away. "That's just sentimental rambling. The best thing we can do now is pack what we can and figure out a plan." My attempt at reason only fueled their frustration. "See, this is why you'll always be a paper scavenger," Alex spat. "No vision, no ambition. You'd rather live in the past than build a future." He turned back to the task, his eyes scanning the room, landing on a small, unassuming display case in the corner of the sitting room. It was the one place they hadn't yet touched. It held my grandmother's collection of porcelain thimbles, some antique silver spoons, and at the very center on a small velvet pillow sat the catalyst object. It was a pocket watch, not a shimmering gold one, but a simple, steel-cased Waltham from the turn of the century. Its face was cracked, and one of its hands was missing. To anyone else, it was worthless junk. To my father and Alex, it was just another piece of the clutter they were desperate to sift through. They had walked past it a dozen times, their eyes drawn to shinier, more obviously valuable objects. Silas's trap was working perfectly. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had to get them out of the house. "Look," I said, my voice taking on a desperate edge. "Let's stop this. I have some savings. It's not a lot, but maybe I can talk to the bank, get us an extension." It was the wrong thing to say. My father's eyes lit up, but not with gratitude. It was with calculation. "Savings? How much savings, Julian? You've been living like a monk. You must have a decent amount tucked away." Before I could answer, a car pulled into the driveway. A sleek, black sedan with tinted windows. It was the kind of car that didn't belong on our quiet suburban street. My father and Alex froze, their treasure hunt forgotten. A man in a sharp, tailored suit stepped out. He was tall, with a severe face and an air of impatient authority. It was Mr. Sterling, the junior solicitor from a rival firm that had been trying to poach the sovereign trust's most lucrative legacy accounts for years. He held a briefcase, and he walked towards our front door with the confidence of a predator. "What's he doing here?" Alex whispered, a flicker of fear in his eyes. My father straightened his shirt, his desperation instantly replaced by a blustering, false bravado. "He must have heard about our financial troubles, probably sniffing around for a bargain on the house." But I knew better. Sterling wasn't here for the house. He was here for the inheritance. He must have somehow found a loophole, a piece of the puzzle I had missed. He couldn't know the full protocol, but he clearly knew enough to be dangerous. He knew about the catalyst object. Sterling didn't bother to knock. He pushed open the door, his cold eyes sweeping over the ransacked room before landing on me. There was a flicker of recognition, a faint, condescending smirk. He knew who I was, the quiet archivist from the trust. "Richard Thorne?" he asked, his voice crisp and devoid of warmth, addressing my father but keeping his eyes on me. "I am," my father said, puffing out his chest. "To what do we owe the pleasure?" Sterling ignored the question. His gaze moved past my father, past Alex, and settled on the display case in the corner. His smirk widened. He had found it. "I am here on behalf of a consortium with a vested interest in the estate of Silas Thorne," Sterling announced, his voice echoing in the tense silence. "We believe a certain asset is located on these premises, an item of great historical and financial significance, a specific timepiece." My father and Alex exchanged a look of pure, unadulterated shock, then dawning comprehension. Their eyes swiveled to the display case, to the worthless, broken pocket watch. The fairy tale was real, and a stranger had just walked in to claim it. The scavenger hunt had just become a high-stakes race. The air in the room became thick, heavy with the sudden, crushing weight of revelation. My father and Alex stared at the cracked pocket watch, their faces a canvas of disbelief morphing into frantic greed. The catalyst object wasn't a metaphor in a dusty journal. It was a real, tangible thing sitting 3 feet away from them. And this shark in a suit, Mr. Sterling, was here to take it. "A timepiece?" my father stammered, his false bravado evaporating. He took a protective step towards the display case. "I'm not sure what you're talking about. This is a private residence." Sterling let out a low, humorless chuckle. "Let's dispense with the pleasantries, Mr. Thorne. I know what that watch is, and more importantly, I know you don't. You see it as a lottery ticket. I see it as a key. My clients have spent years and a small fortune tracing the legal pathways to this moment. We have a legitimate claim." He patted his briefcase. "All the paperwork is right here. We are prepared to offer you a sum for the object itself, a finder's fee, if you will. Say $50,000, enough to solve your immediate foreclosure problem." $50,000. The offer hung in the air, a paltry, insulting sum for a key that could unlock billions. But to my father, who was hours away from homelessness, it must have sounded like a lifeline. I saw the conflict in his eyes, the immediate relief versus the tantalizing promise of a much larger unknown fortune. Alex, however, was less conflicted. His eyes narrowed, the initial shock replaced by a street hustler's cunning. 50,000, he scoffed. "You walk in here uninvited and offer 50 grand for something you call an item of great financial significance? You must think we're idiots." "The thought had crossed my mind," Sterling replied coolly, his gaze sweeping over the trashed room. "My offer is generous, considering your alternative is to be holding a worthless piece of junk on the sidewalk tomorrow morning. The watch is useless without the knowledge to activate it, knowledge that only I possess." A lie. A brilliant, calculated lie. He didn't have the full protocol, but he was betting that we had nothing. "That's where you're wrong," I said, stepping forward. The words left my mouth before I had consciously decided to speak. All 3 men turned to look at me, their expressions ranging from my father's confusion to Alex's annoyance to Sterling's intrigued surprise. "Julian, stay out of this," my father hissed. I ignored him, my eyes locked on Sterling. "You don't have the protocol. You have pieces of it. You probably have the bank routing numbers, maybe even the primary account name, Project Midas. But you don't have the verbal passphrases, the biometric sequence, or the deactivation codes. You can't unlock it. All you can do is trigger the liquidation clause." Silence. Sterling's condescending smirk finally faltered. His eyes, cold and analytical, searched my face, reassessing the quiet paper scavenger he had dismissed moments ago. He saw something he hadn't anticipated. He saw a threat. "And how would you know any of that?" he asked, his voice losing its confident edge. "Because I'm the archivist for the Sovereign Trust," I said calmly. "I'm the legal custodian of the Silas Thorne estate. That watch isn't just a key, Mr. Sterling. It contains a micro-engraved filament, thinner than a human hair, coiled inside the mainspring. That filament holds the first part of a cryptographic key. But if the case is opened improperly, without the correct atmospheric pressure and magnetic shielding, the filament oxidizes and turns to dust. The key is destroyed. The entire inheritance is locked forever, inaccessible to anyone. You, my clients, my family, everyone loses." I was bluffing. Mostly. There was no filament. The watch was purely symbolic, a decoy. The real trigger was a series of actions and phrases. But my lie was built on a foundation of truth they couldn't possibly verify. It was technical, precise, and delivered with the unshakable confidence of an expert. My father and Alex stared at me, their mouths agape. It was as if I had suddenly started speaking a foreign language they were only just beginning to comprehend. The paper scavenger knew things. Dangerous things. Sterling's face was a mask of controlled fury. I had not only called his bluff, but had raised the stakes to an impossible level. He couldn't risk destroying the very prize he'd come to claim. "You're lying," he snarled, but the conviction was gone. "Am I?" I replied, taking a step towards the display case. "There's one way to find out. Go ahead, try to open it." I had him. The standoff was perfect. He couldn't touch the watch, and my family now believed it was a delicate bomb that only I could defuse. Just as the tension reached its breaking point, Alex's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his eyes widening in panic. "Dad, it's the bank. The real estate agent is with them. They're coming for a final inspection in 1 hour. If we're not out, they're bringing the sheriff to forcibly remove us." The spell was broken. Reality came crashing back in. My elaborate bluff, Sterling's power play, it was all meaningless without a roof over our heads. Sterling seized the opening. A cruel, triumphant smile returned to his face. Well, it seems time is not on your side, Julian. You can stand here and protect your delicate bomb, or you can pack your precious boxes of paper. You can't do both. My offer still stands, $50,000. The smart play is to take the money and walk away. My father looked at me, his face a mess of desperation and confusion. "Julian, what do we do?" For the first time in my life, he was looking at me for an answer, not a handout. My mind raced. Sterling was right. I had them in a stalemate, but he had me on the clock. I couldn't move the watch. I couldn't risk my family trying to pry it open the second I left the room, and I couldn't let Sterling get his hands on it. I looked from the watch, to Sterling, to the foreclosure notice on the door. Then, an idea began to form. A wild, audacious plan. It was a gamble that would either save us all or accelerate our ruin. "You want the watch, Sterling?" I said, my voice steady. "Fine, you can have it, but not here, and not now." I turned to my father and Alex. "Pack everything, every box, every book, every piece of furniture. Load it into the moving truck. We're getting out of here." "But the watch," Alex protested. "We can't just leave it." "We're not leaving it," I said, a slow smile spreading across my face as I looked at Sterling. "We're taking it with us, the entire display case, and you're going to help us move it." My demand hung in the air, so audacious and unexpected that it momentarily stunned everyone into silence. Sterling, the impeccably dressed solicitor, stared at me as if I had suggested he personally scrubbed the floors. The idea of him performing manual labor was clearly more offensive than my bluff about the microfilament. "You must be joking," Sterling finally said, a vein pulsing in his temple. "I have never been more serious," I replied, my voice unwavering. "My family is being evicted. We have to move our belongings. That display case, which contains the asset your clients so desperately want, is one of those belongings. According to property law, until the bank formally takes possession of the house, everything inside is still ours. And according to my expert assessment, the watch cannot be safely moved from its current housing. Therefore, the entire case must be moved with extreme care. You want to ensure its safety? You'll supervise its transport personally. That means you help carry it." It was a power play wrapped in logistical absurdity. I was using his own greed as leverage, forcing him to become a participant in our chaotic, humiliating retreat. If he refused, he risked looking like he didn't truly believe the object was as valuable or delicate as he claimed. If he agreed, I would have him and the inheritance under my direct control. Alex started to laugh, a short, sharp bark of disbelief and amusement. He's got you, suit. You want the treasure? You've got to help carry the chest. For the first time all day, my brother looked at me with something approaching respect. My father, still reeling, just shook his head slowly, a dazed look on his face. Julian was all he could manage. Sterling's face was a thundercloud of rage. He was trapped. He shot me a look of pure venom, a silent promise of future retribution. But then he unbuttoned his expensive suit jacket, rolled up his sleeves with a series of sharp, angry tugs, and nodded curtly. "Fine," he bit out. "Let's get on with it." What followed was the most surreal hour of my life. I directed the operation with the precision of a military commander. My father and Alex, spurred by a bizarre new energy, worked with a speed I'd never seen, hauling boxes and furniture out to the moving truck we had rented that morning in a fit of desperate optimism. And in the middle of it all was Mr. Sterling, his jaw clenched, his silk tie askew, helping my father carry my grandmother's heavy mahogany sideboard down the front steps. The main event was moving the display case. I made them treat it like a holy relic. "Slowly," I commanded as Sterling and Alex lifted it. "Keep it level. Any sudden jolts could disturb the internal mechanism." Sterling's face was slick with sweat, his expression murderous, but he did exactly as I said. He was too invested to risk calling my bluff now. We loaded the last of our life into the truck just as the bank agent's car pulled up. A man and a woman in formal business attire got out, their faces grim. We were a pathetic sight, a family and their entire history crammed into a rented truck, with a furious-looking man in a sweat-stained suit standing guard over a small glass box. "Where are we going?" my father asked, his voice quiet as he looked at the house one last time. The fight had gone out of him, replaced by a weary emptiness. "I have a place," I said. It wasn't my apartment, it was a small, secure workshop I rented under a pseudonym on the industrial side of town. It was my real office, the place where I did my sensitive work for the trust. We drove in a strange convoy. The moving truck, with me at the wheel and my father beside me, led the way. Alex followed in his car, and bringing up the rear like a shark trailing a lifeboat was Sterling's sleek black sedan. The workshop was a nondescript brick building, sandwiched between a metal fabricator and a commercial printer. Inside, however, it was a different world. It was clean, climate-controlled, and filled with specialized equipment, document scanners, restoration tools, and a heavy-duty vault bolted to the concrete floor. We unloaded the display case first, setting it carefully in the center of the room. My father and Alex looked around, bewildered. "What is this place, Julian?" Alex asked. "It's my office," I said simply. "Now, Mr. Sterling," I turned to the solicitor, who was impatiently checking his watch. "We've upheld our end of the bargain. The asset is secure. The ball is in your court. But as I said, opening that case is a delicate procedure. It requires specific equipment that I happen to have, but it will take time to set up." "I am not leaving this building until I have that watch," he declared. "I wouldn't expect you to," I replied smoothly. "Make yourself comfortable." I left him standing there, a sentry in his own gilded cage, and turned to my father and Alex. I led them to a small back room with a coffee machine and a couple of chairs. The adrenaline had worn off, and they both looked exhausted and emotionally battered. My father sank into a chair, rubbing his face. "Julian, I don't understand any of this. A microfilament? Project Midas? You've been lying to us." "Not about everything," I said, meeting his gaze. "The part about the inheritance being real, that was true. Silas was a genius, but he was also paranoid. He saw the greed in his bloodline, and he built a fortress to protect his legacy from it." I took a deep breath. It was time for the truth, or at least more of it. The inheritance isn't a treasure chest waiting to be opened. It's a test. Silas believed his fortune should only go to an heir who shared his values, someone who saw worth in history, in preservation, in things that money can't buy, someone who valued legacy over currency. My eyes flickered towards the main room, where Sterling stood guard over a broken watch. He designed it so that anyone who came at it with greed, anyone who tried to force it open, would get nothing. The self-destruct sequence I mentioned, that part is very real. Alex shook his head, struggling to process it. So how do you pass the test? How do you get the money? I looked from him to my father, letting the silence stretch. I let them sit with the reality of what they had almost done, the fortune they had almost vaporized in their frantic, blind hunt. You don't, I said finally, my voice soft but firm. That's the entire point. You don't get the money by trying to get it. The protocol for unlocking the inheritance is an act of preservation, not acquisition. It's a sequence of charitable donations, historical restorations, and endowment fundings, all performed in a specific order. The fortune isn't a payout. It's the ability to control and direct one of the largest philanthropic instruments in the world. I leaned forward, my gaze locking onto my father's. You were right, Dad. He wrote, the fortune awaits the one who can see the value in what others discard. He wasn't talking about the watch. He was talking about history. He was talking about everything you were ready to throw away. Just then, my phone buzzed. It was a secured message from my contact in Geneva. I glanced at the screen. My heart stopped. Sterling hadn't come alone. His consortium was making a move, a brute force digital attack on the trust servers. They were trying to bypass me entirely. The clock I had started was now ticking for me too. The race wasn't over. It had just gone global. The message on my phone glowed with an ominous urgency. Brute force attack on Midas protocol. Firewalls holding. Estimated breach in 20 minutes. Geneva is on lockdown. Sterling wasn't just a solicitor. He was the tip of the spear. While he was here, physically contained and focused on the decoy watch, his consortium was launching a full-scale digital assault, trying to rip the inheritance out of the system from halfway across the world. My clever stalemate was about to become irrelevant. What is it? Alex asked, seeing the color drain from my face. Sterling's partners, I said, my mind racing. They're attacking the trust directly. They're trying to bypass the protocol. I looked through the interior window at Sterling, who was now pacing impatiently, his phone to his ear. He was getting updates. He knew his cavalry was coming. My father stood up, his face pale but his eyes clear for the first time in years. The desperation was gone, replaced by a dawning, horrified understanding. The self-destruct sequence, you said it was real. If they get through, they'll trigger it, I finished for him. Everything Silas built, every institution he wanted to preserve will be gone, wiped out in an instant. For years, I had been the silent guardian, the invisible hand protecting my family from their own worst instincts. Now the roles were reversed. I looked at my father and brother, at the two men whose reckless greed had set this disaster in motion. Their world and mine was about to be shattered, and it was entirely their fault. But in their eyes, I saw not just panic, but the first glimmers of shame. What do we do? Alex asked, his voice barely a whisper. Julian, how do we stop it? There was only one way. The failsafe had a failsafe. A manual override that could only be activated from a designated terminal, the one sitting in my workshop, using a 3-part authentication. It required a biometric scan from me, a complex alphanumeric code from the trust's records, and a final, simple verbal passphrase. A phrase that was never written down, passed only from one custodian of the estate to the next. A phrase hidden in the one place no one would ever think to look for a multi-billion-dollar password. I can lock them out, I said, walking briskly into the main workshop. But I need your help, both of you. Sterling saw my movement and tensed. What are you doing? Don't touch anything. Your friends are getting noisy, Sterling, I shot back, sitting down at my terminal. You're about to lose everything. I'm trying to save your prize for you. The screen lit up with scrolling lines of red text, a visual representation of the cyber attack. The firewall integrity was at 12%. We had minutes. I turned to my father. Dad, in Silas's journal, the one you were quoting from, find the entry for May 4th, 1928. He talks about his first factory. I need the name of the foreman he mentions. My father, galvanized, grabbed the worn journal from a nearby box and began frantically flipping through the brittle pages. Alex, I said, turning to my brother. On the back of the watch, there's a series of tiny numbers etched into the casing. It looks like a serial number. I need you to read them to me, exactly as you see them." Alex rushed to the display case. Sterling started to protest, but Alex shot him a look. "He's trying to save your bacon, you idiot. Just let him work." He squinted at the back of the watch, reading the faint digits aloud. I typed them into the terminal. They were part of the alphanumeric code. "Got it," my father exclaimed. "His name was Henderson, William Henderson." I typed the name. The system accepted it. 2 parts of the authentication were complete. The firewall was at 4%. Now, for the final piece, the verbal passphrase. "Julian, what now?" my father asked, his voice tight with anxiety. I looked at the chaos around me. The boxes filled with our discarded history, the worthless watch that had nearly cost us everything, and the 2 men who were finally seeing the value in what they had almost thrown away. The passphrase was hidden in plain sight, in the most paper scavenger place imaginable. I reached into one of my archive boxes, the one Alex had kicked earlier, and pulled out the soldier's letter from the Battle of the Marne. I carefully unfolded the delicate 100-year-old paper. "The passphrase," I said, my voice quiet but clear, "is the last line of this letter." I looked at my father, then at Alex. Silas's older brother wrote this the day before he died. He never saw home again. Silas kept it with him his entire life. It was the most valuable thing he owned. I cleared my throat and spoke the final words into the terminal's microphone. "Tell them I'll be home by morning." The screen flashed green. A single message appeared: "Project Midas secured, external threat neutralized, legacy protocol awaiting command." In the sudden silence, the only sound was Sterling's phone clattering to the floor. His face was ashen. He had heard the message from his end. He had lost. I leaned back in my chair, a wave of exhaustion washing over me. We were safe. The inheritance was safe. My father slowly walked over and placed a hand on my shoulder. "He was talking about you, Julian," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "The value in what others discard. He wasn't talking about himself. He was predicting you." Alex came and stood beside him, looking at the letter in my hand with a new kind of reverence. The scavenger had saved them. The junk had been the key all along. The next morning I sat across from my father and brother in the quiet workshop. The moving truck was gone, its contents transferred to a storage unit. Sterling had vanished into the night, a defeated man. "So what now?" Alex asked. "You control all of it now. You can do anything." I smiled. "No, we can do anything." I slid a piece of paper across the table. It was the first official directive for Project Midas under my control. "Our first project, we're buying back the house, not just for us. We're going to restore it, and we're going to have it declared a historical landmark. We're going to turn it into a museum, a place for the preservation of local history, funded by the Thorn legacy." My father looked at the document, then at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw true, unadulterated pride in his eyes. He wasn't looking at a walking wallet or a convenient safety net. He was looking at his son. "The paper scavenger," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Turns out it was the most important job in the family all along." My hands were no longer stained with the dust of the forgotten. They were the hands of a builder, a guardian. I had spent my life preserving the legacies of the dead, but in the end I had forged a new one for the living, rising from the ashes of my family's greed to give them something they never knew they wanted: a purpose.